Last week we talked about the golden circle of why, how, and what. And we were talking about why are we a church? Why are we Christians? And the approximate answer, I don't know if this is the perfect answer, but an answer is that we can see how when we follow the human way, how badly we mess up the world. We know that life is better when we follow the way of Christ. Now, what does that mean and how do we follow it? We're going to start today with fellowship because we live in a world where things are coming apart. Whatever happened to the proverbial water cooler? You know, a lot of business, a lot of work. There was the water cooler, and that's where everyone went, take a break, get something to drink, and to talk about ordinary non-work things, just to share things in their lives, to just chit-chat for a while. It's where community is built. Community is built with fellowship. We had a great fellowship Tuesday night. And as I listened to the people talking, they weren't talking about Jesus. They weren't talking about going to heaven. They weren't talking about the Bible. They were talking about their grandkids. They were talking about what they've been up to. They were sharing. And it takes thousands and thousands of little, very light bits of conversation to build community, to build trust. I've been reading books by Tony Hillerman. He was an anthropologist and he wrote a number of mysteries that were set in the Navajo culture. And there's one scene, or there's one passage, there's been a crime, there's been a murder, and they need to ask this old Navajo woman if she knows, has any information. Well, the Anglo detective comes in and he's doing, oh, just the facts, ma'am. You know, he was just drilling her for all that, and she just turns icy and turns him off. So Lieutenant Leaphorn, who's a Navajo policeman, comes in sometime later and he doesn't say a thing. He just sits down with this older lady, with grandmother he calls her, and they talk about Navajo culture and traditions and worries about the younger generation not keeping the traditions. And finally there's a pause. And the lieutenant then says, I have some things I need to ask you about a particular event. And the older woman is then willing to tell everything she knows. It's a Navajo custom to have a relationship before you have information. And that's done with chit-chat. That's done with fellowship. That's done not trying to get right to it, but first of all being part of each other, being there for each other. Fellowship. Bishop Stasi calls it radical hospitality. And we do hospitality pretty well here, I think. We'll have to check somebody who's a recent visitor to see how radical we are. Hospitality means putting the other person first. It means being appreciative of the stranger, knowing, coming to know, being in fellowship with somebody you've never met before. At one church, big sign you saw as you came in the door was, there are no strangers here, just friends who haven't met yet. To be able to just listen to somebody. That's the radical part. Radical means out of the ordinary. And radical hospitality means to extend ourselves to go where we don't easily go. To extend ourselves for the sake of another person is love. When we are living on the way of Christ, we are living the love of Christ. Koinonia, that's the Greek word for it. And it means community of intimate participation. Not just your favorite club or your users group or whatever we go to, but a community where we are intimately participating with each other. I read a writer who said that a lot of churches think of Koinonia as a bus tour through the kingdom of God along the way of Christ. Everybody has their seat, and you all sit quietly in your seat while one person drives the bus and points out all the sights to see in the kingdom along the way of Christ. But Koinonia is an intimate participation. You can't just sit in the bus and look through the window. He says you don't learn how to drive by reading a book. You certainly don't learn how to drive by answering questions on a quiz. You don't even learn how to drive by sitting behind a driving simulator. No, to learn how to drive, you got to get in the car, behind the wheel, turn the key, engage the engine, and step on the gas. That's when you learn to drive. Well, traveling the way of Christ is like driving, not riding a bus. It's getting behind the wheel of our own calling, what God is wanting each and every one of us to do to fulfill our lives and to travel this way together. And it's not just like a city street or something. Actually, this guy says it's more like a demolition derby. The engines roar, the metal scrunches, and there's a lot of mud and a lot of excitement. And we keep bumping into, and sometimes it gets to be kind of a pain. I mean, there are mashed toes and dislocated noses. And there's a moment when we think, I could live without this. I don't need this frustration. I'm going to go somewhere, anywhere, where those pushy people won't be pushing me around. I could just be a Christian without church. Except that's not true. See, that's the human way. That's our individual way. Our lonely way. And it leads to a mess. Life is better when together we follow the way of Christ through fellowship, radical hospitality, and living this outrageous adventure called Koinonia, intimately participating in this life together. Thanks be to God.
Yes, you must become